Hello and welcome to Eth201, Business Ethics and Corporate Social Responsibility. This is the lecture for the second module, Normative Theories of Ethics. As you'll remember, we did Module 1 over 2 weeks, Introduction to the Course and Moral Perspectives of Business. A reminder that the lecture is recorded and will be pre-recorded each week. The tutorial activities related to this lecture occur the week after the lecture, and the forum activities related to this module also occur in the following week. They're due by the Friday of the following week. So what are we doing in this topic this week? So what we're going to be looking at in our objectives and on successful completion of all the activities, students should be able to identify and explain the role of the moral agent in ethical decision making, identify and explain virtue ethics, identify and explain ethics of care approach, identify and explain Kant's theory of ethics and egoism, identify and explain utilitarianism. That's what we're effectively covering in the lecture. And as part of the lecture and in the tutorials, we're going to look at the differences between those approaches. And we're also going to, as part of the tutorial, assess the actions of others as a guide to your own actions. And in assessing the actions of others, I'm asking you for the forum to go and identify a decision by a manager or a company from business media that shows an ethical dilemma or an ethical decision, and then use one of the theories we've discussed today to analyze that decision. And dot points, post that to the forum, comment on another student's post. All that information that I've just said is also in the Moodle webpage for this week, for this module. So let's start now and look at our first objective: explain the role of the moral agent in ethical decision making. This is really a definitional term. We're going to define what moral decision making is, building on what we talked about last week, and then we're going to say who the moral actor is. Moral decision making is how we resolve the dilemma of conflicting individual interests, things that are best for us, and the conflict between individual interests and the overall well-being of society. As we're talking about business ethics, sometimes those individual interests are actually the interests not of the individual manager per se, the individual employee. They might be the individual interests of the organization. The person who is making those decisions is called the moral agent. The moral agent is the actor as an individual or as a group. So that's how we get into having organizations making decisions, or organizations and companies being perceived to make decisions, that has the competence to make decisions that have ethical dimensions. So the moral decision-making process is how we deal with the dilemma, balancing individual interests and the conflict between individual interests and the well-being of society. And the role of the moral the person who makes that decision is the moral agent or the actor. Objective 2, well, we're going to work through each of these types of normative theories of ethics. There are 6 normative theories of ethics that we're dealing with in this class, grouped into 3 categories. Virtue ethics. Virtue ethics are based on character, and broadly there's 2 types of virtue ethics. Aristotle's virtue ethics, which can be simply stated as the development of virtues to become an excellent person. So your goal is to develop virtues to be an excellent person. The ethics of care is another virtue theory. This is based on the concept of feminine sometimes called feminist virtues. It's about caring for others. It used to be called feminine virtue theory, or feminist virtue theory, but it's been broadened out because of the obvious sexism of just calling it feminine virtues. Ethics of care, caring for others is a good thing to do. That's the underlying theory or underlying statement of virtue ethics. We're going to talk about all these as we go along in the unit today in a little bit more detail. The second set of normative theories is I always have trouble saying this. Teleology. Teleology is based on consequences. You do something and there's a consequence. So there are two theories within teleological theories. They are egotism, achieving the moral agent's best long-term interest, and utilitarianism, achieving the greatest good for the greatest number of people. So one's about the person themselves, or the company itself, and one's about balancing the needs of the many over the needs of the few. Or the one. Thank you for those people who understood the Star Trek reference. The third group of theories is deontological theories. This is based on duty and responsibility. There are two broad but overlapping theories within this category. They're both related to people, to philosophers who developed theories. Kant's model of ethics, model of moral decision-making, says that is based on a universal law, that there's something that unites all of humanity, something that is universally clear. Goodwill, and that treating others is an end. Treating others well is an end. The way you treat others is not just the means to the end, it's the end itself. I suppose that's saying you can't use people. Ross's theory, W.D. Ross, says when principles are in conflict, prioritise the most important, recognising and building on all the other theories that sometimes there are choices that need to be made and you need a way to make those choices. Right, we're now going to go and start looking at our virtue theories, and our virtue theories are objectives 2 and 3. Aristotle's virtue theory, ethics of care. At the end of that, we're going to take a break, and there's a video that you can watch. As we group our analysis of these theories, there are theories that have consequences. Those are the virtue theories, the ethics of care, and Kant, and ultimately Ross. Sorry, I'll say that again. Those theories that do not have consequences, virtue theory, ethics of care, Kant, and ultimately Ross. And theories that have consequences, consequentialist theories, which are egotism and utilitarianism. So that's another way to categorize and group these theories. Let's move on to virtue theory and ethics of care. Virtue theory broadly says that virtues are those aspects of human beings that are generally considered to be exhibited by a morally good person. So what is a morally good person? Well, a morally good person is a person that exhibits something on the midpoint between vice, a deficiency, not doing something when you should do it, and vice and excess, doing something that you shouldn't be doing. Those things are linked together by the concept of an ethical mindset. If you have an ethical mindset in which you want to be virtuous, the virtue is the midpoint of the difference between the vice of deficiency and the vice of excess. So that's Aristotle's ethics theory. The other theory that we've got that fits within our virtue theories is the ethics of care. This is an approach to ethics that's motivated by the perception that men and women have different ways of viewing the world. The argument that men focus on viewing the world in terms of justice and autonomy, fairness, and while women think in terms of empathy and caring. I'm not going to get into a big big discussion about whether we agree with that male-female split between justice and autonomy and empathy of care. That's one of the reasons the theory is now called the ethics of care, rather than what it used to be called, which was feminine virtue ethics. Let's just focus on the balance between justice and autonomy as distinct from empathy and caring. So men think it's good, or in the ethics of care theory, it is good to have justice and autonomy. Women think it's good, or in the theory of ethics of care, women think it's good for empathy and caring to be the focus. So ethics of care tries to answer the following 4 questions before making an ethical decision. Is justice being done? Is equality being achieved? So those 2 things are about justice and autonomy. And the other 2 questions is, how do I feel if I was put in a similar situation? Is anyone suffering? So they're about empathy and caring. So in one set of decisions, you'd be trying to be just, and the other set of decisions, you'd be trying to be caring. There's some questions about empathy and care. Because if you're just focusing on empathy and care, what you're doing is you're always putting others over yourself. So does that promote subservience? Does that promote the willingness to obey, no matter how you're treated? The second criticism of ethics of care is it is a very insular process. It's a very narrow focus on the ideas of decision making. And it's really just a reduced form of the broader concept of virtue ethics, saying that we've got this dichotomy here and we should focus on empathy and caring. In virtue ethics, we could see there would be a lot of Aristotle's virtue ethics. We could see there would be a lot of differences in vices and virtues, a lot of differences in competing perspectives, a lot of there wouldn't just be one continuum between justice and empathy. There would be other competing ideas that may be influencing what is virtuous to do in a particular situation. Okay, we're going to take a break now. There's a video for you to watch on the ethics of care. Watch that video on the ethics of care, and then when we come back, we're going to move on to talk about Kant's ethics and egoism, which is the next 2 objectives.